Got a Koto Marky here in the mobile studio. It's a blustery day, but it's rather nice to be by the crashing waves. So I'll give you something to look at as you listen to my dulcet tones. I just need to make yourself a little bit more comfortable. So you're going to get a little bit more dashboard and bonnet or hood, as they say in America, than you are view, but you still get a fairly nice view. So relax and enjoy. Although it's a bit of a dark subject, I'm going to talk about true crime again. Now, I always kind of give a lot of preambles and prefaces and caveats when I talk about true crime, but I'm not going to do that now because I'm making this just off the back of another true crime video that I've just literally made, and they'll probably come out in quick succession of one another. So if you want to know what my feelings are about making true crime content, check out the other video, any of the other videos I've done on true crime, and they're all in a playlist. So suffice to say that I have mixed feelings about it, but occasionally feel a compulsion to talk about true crime, and generally I talk about it from a psychological point of view because I am a psychotherapist. And I'm very interested in deception as well, not as in practicing deception, but as in detecting deception. So that's one of my angles. Now, a gentleman called, well, you might not think he's a gentleman. Some of you will, some of you won't. It's a very controversial case. A guy called Zackary Hughes has recently been convicted and sentenced for the murder of his friend's ex-wife. And I won't go into too much detail about the case because you can find that information elsewhere. You can find a better summary of the case than I can do, because my case summaries are terrible when it comes to true crime. But essentially, he had this is a guy who was a very highly skilled classical pianist. And he made the acquaintance of a guy who had a daughter who he got to know. He was estranged from the daughter's mother. There was a custody battle with the mother. The friend told him lots of detailed information about what the mother was like, and how he was very concerned for the safety of his daughter. And this led Zackary Hughes to believe, or this is what he stated in court, that he had to do something about the situation in order to save the daughter from, ultimately, I think, death, but certainly abuse. And he took the ultimate sanction. He killed the mother. But he stated that he tried every other option. He went to what I would call social services, coming from the UK, but child protection services, and tried to get them to intervene, and they wouldn't. So in the end, he took the case into his own hands and he murdered this woman, because he felt that if he didn't do that, she would probably end up murdering the daughter. And now, it was quite a brutal murder. So normally when somebody's stabbed multiple times, that's kind of often an indication that there might be a little bit of anger involved in the process. Not always, but often it can be. But he actually confesses in court. Zackary Hughes confesses in court, says that he killed her, and he describes the reason there are so many stab wounds is that he found it so hard to stab her. He was like his body wasn't cooperating. He felt so bad and so anxious about and morally conflicted about doing it, that he every time he stabbed, he didn't stab very deeply. He would kind of fall back on the blow, and so there's something like 35 stab wounds, and he tried to knock her on the head twice. And that didn't work because he didn't hit her very hard on the head. And there were rose petals left on the scene, which confused the issue even more. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because if he wasn't identified as a suspect, and what happened was his DNA was under the murdered woman's fingernails. She scratched him in self-defense, and he was identified quite quickly. If he hadn't been identified, a lot of what's the word? a lot of thought and discussion would have gone to the meaning of the rose petals that were left near her body. And actually he said that he gained access to the house by pretending that he was delivering flowers, and that's why the rose petals are there. And not that it was, you know, they talk about a signature, don't they, of like a serial killer, you know, might leave some kind of some form of calling card. You know, so, you know, it was me, you know, they might arrange the body in a certain way. That's a common thing with serial killers. So a lot was made of these rose petals, but it's likely they were just left behind from the roses that he used as his ruse to get into the house to kill this woman. So I've got a lot of thoughts about this case, and my primary angle, I'll go for the main one first, and then do the supplementary thoughts, you know, the peripheral reflections afterwards. But one thing that I found very interesting, this guy, Zackary Hughes, he confessed, and he went into great detail in the courtroom about what he did, why he did it, his mental process leading up to it. I tend to believe him. I tend to think that he genuinely did believe that this was the only action that he could take to protect this child. But I do have one seed of doubt, which I'll come on to. The biggest thread that I want to talk about though with this case is that I think this guy, you can't tell, you know, you can't just how can I put this? I'm not qualified to diagnose, okay? So I'm a psychotherapist, not a clinical psychologist, not a psychiatrist. So I'm not qualified to give mental health or cognitive disorder diagnoses, okay? But obviously I have opinions about things. I'm autistic myself, and in the same way that gay people talk about having gaydar, I'm pretty confident that I can identify autistic people, you know, intuitively and quite quickly. Okay, am I always right? No, and particularly not when it's not somebody that I know, that I've, you know, met, spent some time with, know a little bit about. Sometimes it can be almost instant, but not always. But this guy, Zackary, I think I'll stop calling him this guy, Zackary Hughes. Zack Hughes presents very much as autistic, and that would fit with his profile of being the, you know, the piano player. Now, we've got to be careful because you can fall into stereotypes here, because the thing about the autistic savant, as they call it, you know, somebody that's an autistic, but they're a genius at something. That is true, you know, that's something that does occur. But not everybody that's autistic is a savant. Savant, so it comes from the French word savoir, to know. So often people who are autistic have what they call a special interest, so they can be quite, their interest in things is, most people's interest level is broad and shallow. So neurotypical or allistic people who aren't autistic, their interest level, as in, you know, what they're interested in, so they can converse on a wide range of topics, but they wouldn't go necessarily very deep into any of them. They might have a hobby and they know a little bit more about one thing, or they might have some professional expertise, and they might have a bit of expert knowledge in one thing, but generally speaking they're quite happy to talk about all kinds of things, but they don't dig too deep into any one of those things. And that's where a lot of small talk occurs, is in that area between neurotypical people, where they have a shallow interest in a wide range of things, so they can talk broadly. They can almost converse comfortably on any topic. In a way, the topic doesn't matter, because what's more important is the social interaction and engagement. Whereas autistic people, they don't really see the value of social engagement so much. They're more interested in talking about something that's interesting, or, you know, of value, and they don't like small talk by and large. I don't want to generalize too much, because autistic people vary so much. So autistic people have this tendency to be very, very interested in, you know, a small number of topics, and therefore some of them have the capacity to be, at genius level on those topics or abilities. So so they're playing, so a lot of, I think it'd be fair to say that a lot of top musicians would come into that category. They're quite obsessed around music. They're able to learn, process a massive amount of information and remember it. And this is a guy that he was obsessed with Beethoven, and he wanted to, one of the projects he was doing was to perform all of the sonatas within a short space of time to commemorate his birthday. And they're complex, they take an extreme amount of skill level to memorize and play, or to do that well at any rate. And this guy's the other thing that kind of speaks towards autism is this guy's presentation, which is very kind of matter of fact, very detailed. He spoke in quite a pedantic kind of way, very precise, very detailed, and he's not somebody that's very expressive. He's not gesticulating wildly, and there's not a lot of facial expression going on. Okay, and that is a very common thing with people with autism. Often they don't recognize facial expression in other people. They don't respond to it or read it very well. And often they don't do it very much. And I'm like that, really. That's probably another good reason why I don't, usually put my face in front of the camera. So for me, just to give a comparison, smiling doesn't come very naturally at all. I laugh a lot, but I don't smile a lot. Especially not with social interaction. Somebody smiles at me, so I smile back. It doesn't kind of come naturally, whereas I think for a lot of holistic people, it's just something that happens. Their mouth just smiles at the right times. So I find actually having to do all the facial expression stuff is really wearing, because I have to make an effort with that. It's not, my face isn't set to automatic like a lot of people. So this guy who was, gave a very good account of himself, gave a lot of detail as to why he did what he did and thought what he thought, and how difficult it was and how distressing it was. But his face was very blank, and his voice was very even during this point. Now, the prosecution, the attorneys, they call them in America, we say lawyer, don't we, in the UK? He was great. He was very quite a flamboyant, very good speaker, very eloquent, and in his summing up, so I listened to I don't know how much of the court case I listened to, because it was kind of the format that I watched on was broken up into different videos. So I think I probably watched most of it. I watched all that I could find anyway. Now I've lost my thread. So the court, his presentation. Yes, the summing up by the prosecution. If I was of the inclination to count things, which generally I'm not, the amount of time in a summing up status that the prosecuting attorney used the word cold was phenomenal. I think it must have been at least about 20 times, something like that. And so the verdict is kind of, it's a bit technical, and there'll probably be people watching that understand this better than I do. But essentially, in America, there's different types of murder, aren't there? And murder isn't just about whether you kill someone or not. It's about your intent. And there's something in the American law about kind of malicious intent, malice or something, malice of forethought. Oh God, I'm getting a lisp, I think. Malice and forethought. Although he admitted killing this woman, that wasn't necessarily going to get him convicted of like first-degree murder. So the verdict did depend a lot on this guy's, they call him this guy again, on Zackary Hughes's motivation. But what happens was they found him guilty of the most, the most extreme form of, I presume that's first degree. So they weren't convinced that he had, the jury weren't convinced that he had an honourable or reasonable motive, because obviously killing and murder are different things, aren't they? So there's manslaughter as well, isn't there? And also it's like self-defense, and it's like, well, war, people in the armed forces kill people, and that's not considered murder, is it? So murder isn't just the act of killing someone, it's about why you kill someone. So the jury weren't having any of it, basically. And I think, now this is interesting. Okay, so I'm not going to get too much into whether I think Zackary Hughes was right or wrong. I want to talk more about the issues that this raises. So rather than kind of be an apologist for him or condemn him, I want to talk more about the wider issues, really. So I'm being a bit of a coward maybe, and staying on the fence a little bit with this one. I said that, I was quite convinced by him, but the jury weren't, which is interesting because I'm autistic, and I guess most of the jury weren't autistic. So certainly the general opinion that's being shared on social media and elsewhere is that the jury didn't like him, and they didn't like him because he wasn't expressing what they thought was, remorse and distress, and he wasn't showing facial, lots of facial expressions. He wasn't bursting into tears. He wasn't kind of banging his fists on the sides of the dock. So a big part of how juries respond to, a big part of verdicts is about whether the jury like you or not, isn't it? And also whether they think you look suspicious, so the attorneys can make all these elaborate cases that involve things like facts, but actually the human beings are more swayed by feelings, by their impressions of people, by how people come across. And I think they found him very suspicious because he was talking, he was expressing emotions verbally, but he wasn't demonstrating them in terms of facial expressions and gestures and crying and that kind of thing. So I think they too perceived him as cold, and therefore this kind of ice cold, unremorseful killing machine. And I think that was a factor in the verdict and in the sentence, because they didn't give him a light sentence either. Not the jury, but the judge. So I think this raises the issue of if somebody is not neurotypical and their presentation is not typical, should there not be some checks and balances, so that that doesn't get in the way of them having a fair trial? Now, nothing was raised about him having a diagnosis of autism, and I suspect that's because he didn't, and I suspect that, I would say probably most people with autism, particularly high functioning autism, don't get a diagnosis. It's only people that tend to present in a more extreme way that find themselves getting in front of a psychiatrist that can give them a diagnosis of that. So he probably, if he was autistic, he probably didn't know that he was autistic, and he may not have been autistic, but may have had some autistic traits or some subclinical level of kind of autistic traits. But in either way, this raises just the whole issue, really, that people with autism who get accused of crimes are they going to get fair trials if they don't present in the same way as somebody that's not autistic? Okay, so leave aside the argument of whether he's autistic or not. he presented, I would say, you know, I think it's a fair argument to say that he presented in a way that somebody with autism might well present. Okay, let's say that. You're not going to diagnose him. You know, I think there's a likelihood that he's certainly got some strong autistic traits and might be diagnosably autistic. And another thing interestingly, that, you know, often people with autism have a very strong sense of justice and a different kind of way of thinking. I think often less emotional thinking and more critical thinking, which generally is a good thing, but again makes us kind of look cold, you know, because we don't just kind of go with gut reaction. We look at facts and balance them. So does this mean then that anybody that's autistic and is accused of a crime is at risk of an unfair trial, an unfair verdict, or an excessive sentence based on their presentation? And, you know, this applies to people who are autistic and don't know it. And I just wanted to raise that issue really, because that's a massive issue that, you know, potentially affects a huge amount of people. Okay, huge amount of people. So that's my main point. So it's a question really, rather than an opinion. It's it's just throwing that out there for discussion, and I'd be really interested to hear what you think about this. Don't just give me comments like, oh, he's a bad because he did something bad and he killed somebody. We know he killed somebody, and, you know, generally speaking, you shouldn't go around killing people. Generally, killing people is not a good thing to do. So we don't need to debate that now. I think my suspicion is, and this is reading between the lines, because, you know, there wasn't that much information available about this, but the husband of the ex-husband of the murdered woman, I think, manipulated Zack Hughes into doing these murders from the get-go. And whether he recognized something in the character of Zack Hughes and actually courted him and groomed him for that purpose, I don't know, but I wouldn't actually be surprised. So the husband of the ex-husband of the murdered woman, I suspect, was a very manipulative narcissist. Now, he actually did offer to pay Zackary Hughes to kill his ex-wife, and Zackary Hughes said he was insulted by that. He wouldn't do it for money. He would only do it if he felt that the daughter was at serious risk, and then he would feel honor bound to do it. Now, I think there was a certain degree of naivety within Zackary Hughes, and a certain amount of black and white thinking, and a vulnerability to manipulation. And I think that the ex-husband groomed him and manipulated him from the get-go. And it makes me think of Othello, the Shakespeare play, which I haven't actually watched or read for an awfully long time. I did it for my English O-level or A-level. So I'm showing my age now. You don't know what O-levels and A-levels are, do you? Even the people in Britain, you're all going, hey, what are they? So O-level was like a kind of like so in the UK education system in my day, you had kind of 3 levels. There was CSE, which was very basic, and then you had O-level, which actually stood for ordinary. An ordinary level of education or something. That was actually the full title of it, which is kind of weird to have a certificate saying that you're ordinary, isn't it? And then A-levels were advanced. So in order to go to university and get a degree, you would have to have A-levels. And I actually got blowing my own trumpet here, because I didn't do brilliantly at school because of my neurodivergence. I actually got an A grade O-level and an A grade A-level in English literature. So that was kind of that was my kind of forte really, and I didn't really take that any further. I'm a good writer, but I never really pursued a career along the lines of English literature or English language or anything like that. So Othello. So Othello is often quoted more where sexual jealousy is involved, but essentially you've got this Weasley, manipulative, crafty, cunning, clever little fella called Iago, and this very dignified, very moral, very upstanding chap called Othello, and Iago poisons his ear throughout the whole course of the play, to the point where Othello believes all the lies he's been told and commits murder, and then that's his downfall. I think he commits murder. He brings him to his downfall anyway. And I think this is exactly what happened in this case. Now the behaviour panel covered this. Did I say that already? The behaviour panel, which I talked about in other videos, so it's a YouTube channel where they analyse body language and deceptive behaviour. They talked about a saviour complex with Zackary, which is kind of interesting. So the saviour complex comes out of kind of Jungian psychology, which is where we can, it relates to archetypes, and it's like our psyche can get hijacked by certain archetypes. An archetype is like a universal hardwired ready-made they're quite hard to describe. I want to say symbol, but an archetype is not a symbol. We don't actually really ever see the archetypes, but we see the symbols for archetypes. So the saviour complex, so it comes up in religion, it comes up in people that martyr themselves for a cause, and so the Jungian theory is that a tendency to fall into that pattern is hardwired into every human being. We don't all get the saviour complex, because we might fall for something else. We'll go for another complex. So there's a whole range of kind of so we can become the rebel, you know, that's another archetype. So there's the saviour, the rebel, there's a whole bunch of them. Okay, so and what can happen is that they can kind of, it's called inflation, that you can over-identify with one of these archetypes, and it kind of takes over you. They actually use the word possession. You become possessed by an archetype. So somebody that can actually get possessed by the rebel archetype. I think Lemmy from Motorhead was probably possessed by the rebel archetype. So they picked up on the saviour complex. I suppose I just wanted to say a little bit more about the saviour complex. It's something that lots of people can fall prey to. It's like it's like a ready-made, off the peg delusion that we could all fall into. And as I said before, people with autism often, you know, have a different way of thinking. Often justice is extremely important. Now, justice is important to most people, but I think autistic people, because we're rule followers, you know, we take things quite literally. We're generally law-abiding, and if we're told a rule, we often stick to it, particularly if it seems to have a good rationale. So we can have a very black and white sense of right and wrong, and I think this is what happened. It's like this guy Zackary had the, I know why I'm calling him this guy, because I often talk about Zackary Stockhill, who's one part of the retroactive jealousy world, and this is Zackary Hughes. And I'm frightened that if I say Zackary, I'll say Zackary Stockhill rather than Zackary Hughes, so that's why I'm calling him this guy. So Zackary Hughes, or Zack, let's call him Zack. Although it might sound a little bit too familiar, like I'm, you know, too friendly and too biased towards him. So it does feel like he fell hook, line and sinker into this mode of being. Whereas somebody that had a more fluid and less rigid way of thinking wouldn't have gone down that road, or they wouldn't have gone that far down that road. Now, so I'm just looking at my list here because I've got a few more points to make. I've covered the main ones, I think, really. Before I go on to an alternative view that maybe he wasn't somebody that was motivated in quite the same way towards justice and doing the right thing. But before I do that, we're talking about his name. Just an irony, really. I think this is a coincidence, or maybe there are no coincidences. Is Zack Hughes? If you say it quickly, it sounds like J'accuse, which would be the French for I accuse. J'accuse. And a couple of times when I was listening, that's when people talk quite fast sometimes, don't they? That's how I heard it. I heard J'accuse. So I accuse you. So I thought that was interesting. That's in the name. There is a correlation between names and criminals and crime, people that commit certain crimes. I don't think there's any obvious logic to it, but there is a correlation. If you want to know about that, Todd Grande YouTube channel, he presents some of the research into people's names and and crimes that they committed. Make of that what you will. So the last point I want to make is, which I thought was really interesting, and this occurred to me. So at the end, after listening to Zack Hughes, for the most part, there is a statement in court from the sister of the murdered woman and from Zack Hughes' father. But the sister makes an interesting point. So Zack Hughes at one point decided to kind of forego his musical career and join the Marines, and he particularly wanted to be in the infantry, but his recruitment process got interrupted when he sustained quite a serious injury. I think he broke both of his legs, and he never picked up the mantle on that again. And his sister raised the point that, this is a man that wanted to kill someone, and that's why he wanted to go in the Marines, and that's also particularly why he wanted to be in the infantry. He didn't want to be driving a truck or or maybe like artillery, where you're firing but you can't actually see your enemy. You don't actually see people die at your hands when you're in the artillery, but when you're in the infantry, you're more likely, aren't you, to see people die up close, to be able to pull the trigger and see the effect. She kind of wasn't just too convinced by Zach's explanation of why there were so many stab wounds. Now, is that an alternative conceptualization of Zack Hughes, or could both exist simultaneously? I think both could be true, actually. So I don't think. So it begs the question. So I suppose you look at it two different ways. Maybe Zach was somebody that consciously wanted to kill someone, and you do get people like that. You get a lot of people who think, I wonder what it would be like to kill someone. I say you get a lot of people, I don't know how many people, but you do, it's not uncommon for people to think, wonder what would it be like to kill people, and people who are psychopathic often act on, not often, because most psychopaths, the vast majority of psychopaths don't kill people, but people who kill people who are psychopaths, often the reason that they give is, I wanted to know what it would feel like. I wanted to try it out. And so that's a conscious desire, and it's something that might occur in a lot of people who aren't psychopaths, but they don't entertain it. They might have a mild curiosity as to what it would be like to kill somebody, but then they kind of dismiss it and think about what they're going to have for their tea. But people with psychopathy, they haven't got that conscience. They haven't got an internal barrier to that, so they think, whereas we all might all think, oh, I wonder what it'd be like to do archery, or I wonder what it'd be like to do origami, and we may or may not pursue that, but people with psychopathy you know, pursuing archery or origami, you know, has the same kind of weight as killing someone. Apart from killing someone might be more exciting for them, but it's not. It's as casual, you know. It's as an easier decision to make as, you know, pursuing some other whim. So so was Zach somebody that was consciously thinking, I would like to kill somebody? I would, you know, I've always wanted the opportunity to kill someone, but I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to be seen as a bad person, you know. So if I join the Marines, I kill people, I can be a hero. And therefore he saw an opportunity to kill somebody and maintain a moral high ground, and not suffer the consequences. In which case it's a whole different kind of scenario to the one that he presented in court, which I tend to go along with, but you know, I keep an open mind. Or it could be a little bit of both. So it could be he does want to kill, you know, he is curious about what it's like to kill someone, but that's a thought that he's buried, you know, that's in his unconscious. But still, you know, exercises some leverage when he's presented with a situation in which he's invited to kill someone, and where you know, he feels he might get away with it and they might have the moral high ground, and it's exacting an unconscious influence. It's pulling on him, but he's not consciously aware of it. Okay, so that could be true as well. And I think it's probably, yeah, like I say, I mean, why do we watch so many films that involve violence and death? You know, I mean, the death toll in so many movies, you know, is very high, isn't it? And then before we had movies and stuff, you know, people would go after church on a Sunday. They'd go out and watch things like bull baiting. You know, so animal cruelty. You know, so this is where dogs. This is where we have breeds like bull terriers, pit bull terriers, and what were the other ones? Bull mastiffs, I believe. I'm not sure about bull mastiffs, but dogs that were bred to rip bulls apart and attack and fight with bulls. You know, so people would come out of church on a Sunday, and that would be their entertainment. They'd watch that. You know, so you know, there is a level of aggression and sadism within so many people that only comes out in certain circumstances. So that desire to kill someone, you know, is probably in a lot of us, and most of us will never ever come anywhere near doing that, but we will probably quite enjoy a war film or something similar. Now that's a whole controversial issue as well when it comes to, you know, so Marky, are you saying that everybody that wants to join the army, especially if they want to go in the Marines, especially if they want to go in the infantry, what you know, does that mean are you saying they're all, you know, latent murderers? They're people that just join them because they want to kill people? No, I'm not saying that. But there will be people that do that. You know, there will be people. It's a complex issue, isn't it? And one we don't want to think about, because soldiers, bless them, they do our dirty work, don't they? So you know, soldiers go out and kill people, so we don't have to. So we don't want to look too deeply into that. You know, we don't like to think about, you know, our service people. We like to think of them as heroes. We like to think of them as, well, they're on the good, they're goodies, they're on the good side, they're keeping us safe, they're, you know, they're killing the bad people. It's an uncomfortable thing to think about, isn't it, really? Just the very fact that that civilized countries all have these armed forces. We all, you know, they spend billions and billions on, you know, things for killing people. You know, it sits at odds with how we like to think of the world. So it's a place we don't want to go, really. So I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. But it was interesting what the sister said. And the other thing I thought was interesting what the sister said was, or what the sister didn't say, is that if the murdered woman was this terrible, horrible, you know, probably narcissist or psychopath, which is and sadist, how she was described to Zach, then why wasn't the sister aware of that? Why didn't the sister come out and say, well, he shouldn't have killed her, but she, if anybody deserved to be killed, then she should, because she's this, you know, evil, nasty, bully, manipulative, thieving person. And the sister was actually living with her and sharing space with her. I think now this is where it gets complicated, because narcissists have flying monkeys, and they have lieutenants, and they have people that they're thoroughly sweet and nice to, while they can abuse and manipulate other people. So it's not necessarily the case that the sister would recognize that she's a narcissist and see her as, you know, somebody that was potentially harmful to the daughter. You know, she could have been oblivious to that, and that's not a slight on the sister. That's just how convincing narcissists could be. But it's interesting that you know, I don't think there were any kind of character witnesses that came out and said, oh, this woman is, you know, is evil, nasty, vindictive, blah blah blah. Now, just the final piece of information, so this is just a fact, not an opinion or a reflection, is that the daughter was in danger, because the husband of the woman that was killed, the husband of her mother, has been accused. And I say accused, so I don't think that there's been a conviction or anything yet, but he has been accused of having sexual abuse material of the daughter on his phone. So the reality was that the daughter was at risk. Well, not at risk, was actually actively being harmed, but therefore obviously at risk of more extreme harm or continued harm. So how much, or if at all, the mother was complicit in that, or neglectful in failing to prevent that and keep the daughter safe, we don't know. There's going to be another court case about that. So and the tragic thing was that Zackary was not allowed to bring up any of those issues in court, and he did occasionally, but it, you know, it got there was an, you know, the prosecution made an objection, and I think he actually got convicted, if that's the right word, of contempt of court, because he did proceed to start to talk about that stuff, knowing that he shouldn't have done. But you can't blame him if that was the case, and you know, it's you know, the validity of that decision of not letting him bring that up was very questionable, because I would say it is relevant. You know, if his case is that I murdered this woman because I thought her daughter would be at risk of serious harm or death if I didn't, and then we find out that the daughter is at risk of serious harm, or, you know, like I said, more than at risk, was undergoing serious harm, and therefore at risk of, you know, the potential for something much more serious, possibly death, you know, I'd say is very valid. So so that's another interesting factors. But my point really isn't to talk about the case and the legalities of it, or culpability even, but my main point really is just how do people get treated when they don't present in a typical way, in terms of expressing emotion, in terms of facial expressions, and all those other things. And surely there should be some checks and balances to prevent that from happening. And this brings up the whole issue as well of critical thinking versus emotional thinking. So most people are prone to emotional thinking. Critical thinking is something really that you have to learn. It doesn't necessarily come naturally. So most of the thinking that goes on isn't great. You know, we don't think well as a population. We don't think using, you know, logic. Yes, of course, you know, to a degree we do, but it's to a differing degree. So critical thinking, which is where you're consciously using logic, and you're consciously much more skeptical of sources of information. You're much more discriminating in terms of, you know, what information you'll attach value to, what's valid, what's less likely to be valid. Whereas the bulk of the population, it's very much emotional thinking, and they're as much informed by their nan or the bloke down the pub as they are by, you know, research that's been conducted by experts you know, and taken years and been extremely vigorous and well conducted. So we're more likely to respond irrationally and emotionally than we are critically. And that's pretty scary, especially when it comes to things like juries. And the jury, you know, they're not trained. They're just a bunch of random people. Pat Brown YouTube channel, she says a bunch of people off a bus stop. That's how she describes it. They're not necessarily going to be, there might not be one critical thinker among them. They might all be emotional thinkers. You know, so I think, you know, being in the dock, being accused of anything, you know, if you're innocent, pretty terrifying, really. You're at the mercy of a lot of things that maybe you shouldn't be at the mercy of. There should be better processes in place to ensure fair trials for everyone. And on that note, I will say farewell and thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.